Although the majority of Scots wanted to remain members of the European Union, the country had to leave as part of Great Britain at the end of January. This has always caused anger and resentment in Scotland, which is now worsening in view of the imminent consequences. Is there even a threat of a second referendum now? If it had only gone to Scotland, everything would be different today. Great Britain would still be a member of the EU, there would be no tough negotiations on an exit treaty, any more than fear of a hard Brexit and quarrels about fishing rights, social and environmental standards. Because 62% of the Scots voted Remain in the referendum on leaving the EU, they wanted to stay in the EU. The bitter pill, however, Scotland had to go along as part of the United Kingdom and left the EU on January 31st. It will remain part of the EU internal market and the customs union only until the end of the year. To date, there is no treaty on future relations with the EU. The Scots are very unhappy with the no deal that is now to be expected, but they will not be able to prevent it, says political scientist Tanja Börzel from the Free University of Berlin. In general, Scotland is in an awkward position. The vast majority of Scots actually wanted to remain a member of the EU, but are now losing the advantages of the EU internal market, and Great Britain will not be able to compensate for that, says Börzel. Because everything the British government wants to compensate cannot be met. This ranges from subsidies for structurally weak regions in the north of England to project funding for British universities from the European Research Council, explains Börzel. Because the Scots have little political influence over UK politics, they have little chance of getting a big piece of the pie in the redistribution struggle. Johnson's interest in Scotland is relatively low, says Börzel. Politically, he doesn't need Scotland because the strongholds of the Tories are in England. The focus in the Brexit negotiations is therefore also in England, where most of the Brits live. The majority of the Tories are not prepared to make concessions to the EU and would rather accept a hard Brexit in return, says Börzel. If he approached the bulkheads here, he would have a row with his own parliamentary group, the expert is certain. And they won't get a second referendum without Johnson's approval, says Börzel. This is exactly what the Scots are currently calling for. They voted on independence from the United Kingdom as early as 2014, but decided to remain with a narrow majority. Because the cards were reshuffled by the decision for a Brexit and the corona crisis, the 5.5 million inhabitant country wants to vote again. But it's not that simple. Johnson rejected the call for a second independence referendum in January 2020, but the Scots cannot hold an independence referendum without the approval of the British government, explains Börzel. The argument goes, in a democracy you cannot vote so often until the result is right. Although I must disagree on that part, because we have a local law here that says that in my council we cannot vote on the same topic again before 6 months have passed. So after 6 months we can reopen the whole thing again if there's new information or if the situation has completely changed even earlier. The Scots should have thought about it beforehand. The Brexit referendum has been in the room since 2013, explains the political scientist, and I disagree with her there. Because a secession from the United Kingdom is a long way off, the Scots lack a treat. A threat, sorry, not a treat. It would be a treat for the Scots to leave, but in this case I meant threat. With the rejected independence, the Scots have given up a lever, because now the territorial integrity of Great Britain is no longer at stake, says Börzel. The threat to leave the UK if a hard Brexit really takes place is ineffective because it cannot be implemented without the approval of the British government. The forced marriage cannot hide the fact that the Scots think differently. Politically, they are not as conservative as many Britons, says Börzel. The Scottish First Minister is Nicola Sturgeon from the left-wing Liberal Scottish National Party, the SNP. Less than 10% of the seats in the lower house, the House of Commons, and that means the Labour Party is as good as non-existent in Scotland, and the Scottish National Party, which has a similar agenda, has essentially stolen all of its votes, Börzel continued. As I said, I want to give you a lot of German views on things like this. This is the Free University of Berlin, a very renowned university in Germany, but I disagree on a lot of things with her in this case, and I will always state this during the video as well. This means that the Scots are only represented in the British Parliament by the SNP, and that's quite right. A look at the distribution of power there. The British House of Commons has 650 members. The ruling party, the Conservative Party, also known as the Tories, has 362 seats. The Social Democratic Labour Party alone holds 201 seats out of 277 opposition seats. The SNP has only 48 seats, that's less than 10%. Overall, there's little for the Scots ruled by Social Democrats to tear, especially when the Conservative Tories are in power with a full majority, says Birdsall. The fact that the Scots voted so differently than the English in 2016 is mainly due to socio-economic differences. In England, there are more so-called dependent population groups. More people there see themselves as losers in globalization and feel left behind in the restructuring away from the industrialized to a digitized society, explains Birdsall. In addition, the English press has always been very skeptical and hostile to Europe. The Scottish media tend to report more positively about Europe and the EU, said the expert. Do the Scots still have a chance to become part of the EU again, she asks. The first requirement would be a split from the United Kingdom. The difficulties of a second referendum have already been mentioned by her, but she's missing out one point, because the Tories always stated you can just quit a contract. So why can't the Scots just quit a contract that is hundreds of years old but still was signed by two sides? That's another question I'm asking myself. Perhaps my Scottish friends can explain to me if that is an alternative solution there. And not to forget the way over the courts. But even after that, there would be imponderables. An independent Scotland would by no means simply accept it into the EU, said Birdsall. Until then, I agree with her. Scotland would have to apply for membership, that's true. Expert Birdsall sees the internal cohesion of Great Britain at risk. Probably. The lack of awareness of the subject of Brexit in the British public is shocking. If the Scots soon feel the consequence of Brexit, their displeasure could intensify, estimates Birdsall, and I agree with her. But she also added that Spain would veto Scotland as a member of the EU. The Spanish government already made clear that that has nothing to do with the Catalans. It's a different thing than the Catalans, because Scotland was an independent nation in the past. And not that long ago, it was 18th century. And they will not veto it. They made that clear. So that part is gone, and there I really disagree with Frau Birdsall. And the other point is, I'm quite sure many countries would really welcome Scotland. And not to forget, now to bring that up again, how much of the fishing grounds is on Scottish territory? Just to end it with that. I'll see you in my next video. Viel Spaß.